What up, TCK Potters? Welcome back to the program. I'm your host, Sky Guasco. This is another episode of the Candlestick Kids Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm going to take some time here to make a dedication and pay tribute to Mike Tagliere, who passed away this last weekend after a long fight with COVID. If you do not pay attention to, fantasy Twitter, or this is the only podcast you listen to by chance, or you're unfamiliar with fantasy pros or Mike Tagliere in general, then I want to shed some extra light on who he was as a person and a fantasy analyst, and an inspiration to myself and many other folks that do what I do and what Bobby does and what everybody else in the TCK and Fantasy Focus team do. And a huge part of that is going from an independent space where we're at now and growing it into a brand, growing it into a business, growing it into an income, and ideally someday, hopefully a career, which is what I strive to do with TCK, and the Fantasy Focus guys do as well. So I'm going to spend some time giving a dedication here to Mike and what he meant to me personally. I'm not going to speak for the rest of my team on this. This is a personal note that I want to put out there. And I've been thinking about it all weekend. I heard the news when everybody else did on Twitter. Everybody knew that he was struggling with COVID. It's been a few weeks. His wife, Tabby, had been updating via Mike's Twitter, at Mike Tagliere on Twitter, updates throughout the last couple of weeks. And unfortunately, we all found out that it wasn't looking good for the last 10 days or so, 2 weeks, sending out thoughts, and if you're a praying person, prayers and well wishes and everything. And got mixed reviews for quite a while. And then unfortunately last week, Tabby let us know that it wasn't looking good, and to really put that good energy out there. And that's what we did. Unfortunately, it wasn't quite enough. And Mike lost his struggle to COVID-19 over the weekend, and he passed away. So I want to take some minutes here, as I said, and to do that, I also would love for you to contribute, if you possibly can, to Mike Tagliere's Gofundme. It was set up by Fantasy Pros and his wife, Tabby, and as you can see on the screen if you're watching, they asked for about $100,000 for medical expenses over the last, month or so that he's been in. And in just over 3 days, they've raised over $360,000 throughout the community in fantasy football, and of course his family and friends in his personal life. We here on the TCK and the Fantasy Focused crew donated 100% of our proceeds from Sunday's Start Sit. Came out to about $200 was our donation. And we can't thank you all enough for joining us on Sunday and contributing and helping us out with that. All the super chat functions that came in and donations, we donated all of that to Mike and his family. So again, thank you for anyone that was a part of that. And a lot of the donations came in and didn't even have fantasy questions attached to them. They just simply were wishing well and wanted to contribute. So whether it was $1 or $100, we appreciate all of you. If you would like to continue to donate, or you haven't yet, or you'd like to make a contribution in private, then I strongly recommend you go to GoFundMe and look up Mike Tagliere's account and make a donation at that point. So again, if you are unfamiliar with who Mike Tagliere was, Mike was a pillar in the fantasy football community. Absolute, just incredible person, which I'll get to in a little bit. But in the fantasy football world specifically, just really led by example in all forms. He is known in the space for his work ethic, his authenticity, his kind of no BS approach, right? He didn't have a bunch of fluff, didn't have a lot of hot takes, didn't talk out of both sides of his mouth. He did incredible research night and day. You may be familiar with the Primer, which was his baby. He did for years. It was an article on every fantasy relevant player every single week. It was an unbelievable undertaking that he decided to put on himself years ago. And he did it every single week of the fantasy football season for every fantasy relevant player. Absolutely phenomenal. That is something that I've used myself for 5 years at least, coming up with my analysis. I've cited him on this show. I mean, I'm 458 episodes in now, and I've cited Mike's work on probably 400 of those at least. He was a huge inspiration to me personally, and I was lucky enough to have him on this show in middle June. Now, as you can imagine, Mike working for Fantasy Pros and originally Pro Football Focus and some other networks as well. He's the co-host of the Fantasy Pros podcast and jumps on with anybody else at any given time he possibly can share his time with. He's very, very, very busy. Now, I've been a fan of Mike's work for years, and I'm not really a shy person. I don't really hold back much. If you've watched the show at all, you know that. But I admire Mike so much. I've always looked up to him so much. The way that he goes about things is the way that I wish to go about it myself. So I've always had, for some reason, a hard time reaching out to him specifically. I've reached out to ESPN people, fantasy footballers, CBS, I mean, Yahoo, you name it. I've reached out to those folks. I've had a lot of great guests on the show. Mike, for some reason, was like this unicorn in my brain. I just felt like, why would he take time to come on my show? Right? Like in my mind, I'm a nobody. I'm 400 plus episodes in, but like I'm just some guy that likes to do this on his free time and hopes to make a career out of it some way. But why would Mike, of all people, come on my show? Well, 100 episode comes and goes. The 200th episode comes and goes. 300th episode came up last year, and I reached out, but I reached out too late, and that was my bad, right? Mike is very busy, and some downtime is about March, April, May, maybe June before the season really cranks up in July and August, as you can imagine in fantasy football. So I reached out too late last year, and he basically gave me a very generous, just, hey man, appreciate the shout out. I'd love to come on, but I've run out of time this year. Let me know next time. I was like, bummer. Okay, cool. Probably won't even hear from him again, but okay. Well, the season comes and goes last year. And then this year comes up and I have the 400th episode coming around the corner. So I reach out to him one more time. I say, hey, Mike, you may not remember me, but I reached out this time, 300th episode. I'm 100 more in. I'm 400, looking to celebrate our 400th episode in June. And I would love for you to come on and contribute to that. I kind of sent the message, crossed my fingers, and kind of forgot about it because I didn't want to get my hopes up. Woke up the next morning, had a great email back from Mike. Incredibly generous. Absolutely. I'd love to be on. I sent him a snippet of one of our episodes to give him an idea. He listened to a chunk of it, said I was doing a great job, encouraged me to continue to do it. Said, he reminded me a lot about myself. I told him a little bit about my backstory and all these other things, which relates to Mike and family life and music and sports and everything else. And so he decided to jump on my show. And I remember when he got back to me and I reached out to a couple of my good buddies here in the space and personal friends who know that I'm a big fan of Mike, and was like, holy shit, he said yes. He said he would do it. And then I started getting nervous, right? Like I wasn't nervous because I didn't think he would say yes. He said yes, and then I got nervous. So I spent the next maybe week just like, oh God, all right, this is my shot. Don't blow it. Come up with some great content, come up with some good questions. What am I going to do? And I reached out to him and I said, hey man, what do you want to talk about? Right. I want you to be comfortable. And he basically was like, look, man, I do this every day. You tell me what you want to do. I'm ready to go. So I try to be professional. It's what I do with my guests, right? I send them a show sheet. I let them know what we're going to talk about. We set an agenda, yada, yada. So I bring up this big show sheet. I'm all proud of it. And I send it to Mike. I was like, hey man, this is what I would like to talk about. And he goes, cool, man. See you then. I'm like, great. We get on pre-show. And we're hanging out. I meet him, over the camera and, hey, how you doing and everything else. And just such a sweet guy. And I go, hey, so I want to make sure you got that show sheet. I just hadn't heard from you since. He's like, oh, no, I didn't look at that. I'm like, What? Like, what the hell are you talking about? You didn't look at the show sheet. I say, he's like, no, I never look at those. I like to be off cuff. I want to be natural. I don't want to have scripted answers. I do this all day, every day. I know what I want to talk about for every player. Feel free to ask me anything. Okay. Sure enough, we get going. And that particular episode, you can listen to it. It's archived in our podcast. Go to Candlestick Kids Fantasy Football Podcast, anywhere you listen to podcasts, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, wherever you listen, Believe Podcast Networks. It's episode 400, dropped in late June. And you can check it out. We talked about teammate debates. And it was certain, I won't go through all of them, but it was certain guys like which guys would you rather draft coming into the season, like, Chris Godwin or Mike Evans, CeeDee Lamb or Amari Cooper, Robert Woods or Cooper Kupp, things like that. Bengals wide receivers, um, rookie running backs like Melvin Gordon or Javonte Williams, things like that. And we went through that. And the second half of the episode was just him and me talking. Right. I've been a nationally touring musician for 15 years. Mike is a diehard, music fan. He's a music nut, talks about it all the time. When I was in middle school, I was a big fan of the band Korn. And Mike is his favorite band ever. We talked about a story where he got to meet the band. He went backstage and met the band, right? And whether you like Korn or not doesn't matter. Like, think about your favorite artist ever, whoever it is, musician, artist, whoever it is. You get to go backstage, hang with the band, talk to them, and hang out. That's what Mike was able to do. So Mike did that, right? He kind of flexes on me a little bit, kind of like, yeah, man, I pulled that off, So he pulls that off, right? Talks to Korn, has a great time. Then we start talking cars, right? He's a big car guy, and I'm not. So I asked him some questions to get better educated, and it was awesome. He's very open to sharing. And then we talked about his wife and kids, his wife Tabby and his two kids, and I have a daughter as well, in high school, and he does as well. They're about the same age, and we just kind of talked like dad life for a minute, outside of fantasy football. This is all recorded. This is on the episode, but we just kind of had a human moment and put the football away and just kind of talked like dad to dad, person to person. And he gave me some great advice. And couple things I've been noticing in the fantasy community with all these tributes to Mike, but just goes to the person that he was. Every single person that talks about Mike talks about a couple things. First of all, his work ethic in fantasy football. Also, how genuinely sweet he was. Just a good person, generous person, a very nice individual. And then they talk about how much he gloated about his wife and his kids. And he did that on my show as well. I opened up the floor for him. His wife runs a podcast, and I checked out her podcast a while back, and I love it. And I asked him about it. He was like, wow, I can't believe you even know about that podcast. Tabby Talks, like, give it a listen. Great stuff in there. But Tabby Talks podcast, I listened to it, and he was just floored that I gave it the time. Right. And he started gushing and blushing a little bit. And you could tell he got all kind of sweet on the backside, talking about her and how she was the reason. She was kind of the momentum to push him over the top to really get into the field. He was a banker, right? And he was doing this as a hobby, like a lot of us does. And she was like, Mike, you have a skill, you have a drive, you have a passion. Go after that. And she was really the crux to get him into the space, Fantasy Pros and fantasy, Pro Football Focus and these other avenues he was at over the years. So that was just awesome because my partner's done that for me for years with this and music and everything else. Like, it's so important to have that backbone. And so I related to Mike a lot on that as well. And I'll just never forget, we talked off camera and ended our episode. He was absolutely phenomenal. If you're on YouTube, you can see the picture here. I took a screenshot of our episode, and it's just me and him with big old smiles, like organic, just big smiles mid episode. I found a nice clip for a thumbnail. And it's just awesome. Like, he's obviously having a good time. I'm obviously having a good time, and we're just talking, and Mike, I put him on such a pedestal because of what he does. And I still do have so much respect for who he is in the fantasy community, but as an individual, as a person, as a father, as a husband, as an individual in the space. And I put him on this pillar. And while I still believe he belongs on it, he would never say that or act like that, right? Incredibly humble, And I thanked him about 15 times. It was embarrassing on my show. And every single time he was like, look, man, just it's cool. Do your thing. I believe in you. I trust in you. You guys are doing great work here. This is just before the Fantasy Football Expo happened in Cleveland, or excuse me, Canton, Ohio, where the Pro Football Hall of Fame is. And I was kind of undecided whether I was able to go, right? Of course, this is middle pandemic and everything else. And Mike and I were talking about whether we were going to go or not. And he said, regardless, man, if I don't go or we don't make it, whatever, this is before he got sick. If we don't go, um, you'll be hearing from me soon. Because I was like, you know what I would love, Mike? I would just love an opportunity to come on the show and talk with you, talk with Yates, talk with Joey P, talk with Dan Harris, talk with the Fantasy Pros crew. I've been listening to these guys for years, and it would be an honor to come on and have a guest slot. And if you would ever grant me that opportunity, I won't let you down, And pretty much the last thing he said to me personally was, I believe in you, and not guaranteeing that it would happen, but he basically said, we'll be in touch soon, and kind of with a wink as he got off the camera, kind of I'll spread the word. Let me see what I can do for you, kind of a thing. And I didn't think much of it. He doesn't owe me anything, but that just made my heart full that he even had the thought of this kid's worth telling somebody about. And whether I ever make it on their show or not doesn't matter at this point. It's really just an honor that he thought of me in that light. So I appreciate that. It was really a pleasure to have him on the show, and I'm so glad I got the privilege to talk to him and spend some minutes with him because, again, in fantasy football, he has been my number one, and it's no disrespect to anybody else. I have many, many, many other people who have been on the show, many people who will be on the show someday that I look up to and aspire to be like. But Mike just really, it was a number of things that he did in his personal life and in fantasy football that I gravitated toward the most. And like any role model, right? You look up to these people. And for him to take time out of his busy schedule to join my humble beginning show just meant the world to me. And I'll never forget it. Of course, I'm devastated to hear the news of his passing, and I'm devastated that he won't be on my show again. I'm devastated I won't go on his show to talk to him. I'm really sad about that. And it was a really rough weekend. I saw everybody jumping on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube tributes and all these things, and I thought they were so sweet. I watched about 50 of them. And I had so much to say and didn't say anything, at the same time. I just didn't feel it was my space. I felt like it was an opportunity to promote the GoFundMe account, spread the word to help Tabby and the kids, not put the shine on me and save this story and tribute for another time. And I'm glad that I did because I wanted to gather my thoughts and put everything together appropriately. And I'm so glad that his tribute has gone so well. The GoFundMe account, again, is over, as of this episode, it's over $367,000 for the family. So want to give blessings to Tabby and his kids. And, just want to thank Mike for everything that he did for me as an individual. Seeing all the other tributes has just been absolutely heartwarming. It's unfortunate that this has had to be the thing to bring the community together, but it's been such a beautiful experience to watch the community come together in the way that it has. Everybody put aside, I should say, the griping and the bullshit and the complaining and the, smack talk on Twitter and stuff. All of that kind of disappeared this last weekend. And it was little football even talked about. It was just, shouts out to Tags and his family and what he did for the community and everybody else. So again, if you are able to contribute, please do. I don't ask you all for much. We have our Sunday live show that I appreciate you all contributing to. That helps us build our channel to bring you more content. That's incredibly rewarding to us, and that's very fulfilling. So we appreciate that. That being said, if you're able to contribute, please go to GoFundMe, look up Mike Tagliere's account, and put in a donation. $1, $5, $20, 400, whatever it is, whatever you have to contribute would be absolutely fantastic. And I would appreciate that. Consider it maybe a personal favor from me. If you can't, I understand, and that's not a problem. Maybe you could share the link instead. You could let folks know that it's happening, and that account is available to help out his wife and his family. So once again, Mike Tagliere, better known as Tags, passes away this last weekend, unfortunately, after a long battle with COVID-19. He got sick just a couple weeks after he was on our show in June, and he had spent the better part of the last 2 months in the hospital, in ICU, on a ventilator, kind of going on and off. And again, his wife Tabby gave us updates, but wasn't looking good. So take care of yourself, take care of each other, and do your best to stay healthy. Help each other out, be kind, be compassionate. If you have a passion like Tags did to fantasy football, follow it. I'm following mine. It's hard as hell. A lot of setbacks. It's tough. But follow it. You never know where it's going to take you. And Mike is a prime example of just a random guy who loved to do something and put his head down and had the support to do it. And he outworked everybody. That's what he's known for. And just the absolute best. We're going to miss him. I'm going to miss him. The fantasy community is going to miss him. It's all love, Tags. Appreciate you, brother. Thank you for listening to this tribute and listen to me just kind of say a few words here about Mike. Unfortunately, I was not able to meet him in person. I didn't get that honor, but I did have him on the show, and I did talk to him about half hour before and after the show, just kind of life stuff. And I'll never forget that conversation. I've looked up to him for 5 years. He took the time out of his schedule to come and see me and be a part of the show, and it just means the absolute world to me. So I appreciate that, and I hope I can someday make a percentage amount of difference to somebody else's life or show or upcoming that Mike did to mine and many others. So thank you again for listening to this. We'll get back to fantasy football because I know that's what Mike would want from all of us, is to push forward. But I wanted to carve out some time here and dedicate some words and some messages here to Mike and for his family. So once again, if you're able to contribute to the GoFundMe account is up and it's running. I believe it's going to be open for the season. I believe, and I highly recommend, and I will be doing this myself. I highly recommend that when you win your leagues, when we help you win your leagues, maybe a percentage of your proceeds and your winnings go into this GoFundMe. That would be a great way to give back. A lot of the knowledge I give you is a lot of knowledge Tags gave me. So this would be an excellent way to pay it forward, literally, and get it back to where it belongs. So thank you again for listening up here, and treat yourself well, stay healthy, be compassionate, show some love for Mike Tagliere and his family, and I'll be back with you again soon. Thank you very much. Take care.